hopefully after this it will be tomorrow. So thanks for the introduction, Marta. So we can skip over this part relatively quickly. Probably some of you have been here yesterday. So I'm Maurice Maurer from Training Scientists. And as Marta said, my background is in computational physics from Max-Planck Institute for Plasma Physics. And after the PhD, I've decided to become a full-time trainer for courses for scientists and PhD students. And what we're going to look at today is part of the course on managing physical and mental health in a high-stress environment. So the course itself, it's called The Healthy and Productive Scientist. It's a little catchier than the original title, and the content there is simply the definition of a healthy lifestyle, because whenever we want to change something about our lives, whenever we want to improve something about our lives, first of all, we're going to have a goal to aim at. And then we look at movement and exercise, posture health, and ergonomics. And if you've been here yesterday, we looked at movement and exercise. Off that workshop day, and the third day is about nutrition, fourth day is about recovery and sleep. And today we're going to look a little bit deeper on the topic of sleep. And on the last day, we look at mental health and mental performance. Right, so let's dive right in. I want to start with this little comic from Dino's comic. So it's okay to do nothing, because sometimes doing nothing is doing something. So especially in our world where everything has to be super fast and high performance, and also as a PhD student or general scientist, you're under a lot of pressure to publish, to get your thesis done, and to work a lot. And usually we don't take the time anymore, or it's even having a bad reputation to take time for yourself, to take time to relax, recover, and even to sleep. And hopefully with today's talk, I can convince you, at least a little bit, to at least take the time to sleep, because it is quite important. And actually the lack of sleep can also impact your ability to perform and to be productive. So it's not just people being lazy, like the popular opinion has become over the last 10-20 years, if you need more sleep, but it's simply useful and common sense to take care of yourself. So before we get into the science and before we get into everything else, I want to show you this book, which is actually very cheap. It's on Audible. You can also buy it as a hard copy or Kindle or whatever. And I can only recommend it to you. It has summarized all of the research that has been done on sleep, basically since World War II. And Matthew Walker is a professor that specializes in that research. So a lot of the research is actually done by himself. And this is basically an easy to read version of the science he has done. And just to start with a quick motivation. So as a man, if instead of 8 to 9 hours, you get 5 hours of sleep, you have measurable lower testosterone, 29% lower sperm count, and also considerably smaller testicles. And for women, similar studies have been done on women working night shifts, and those women have 33% higher rate of abnormal menstrual cycles, and 80% more likely to be subfertile. So I hope with this, I have your attention, so we can first of all dive maybe a little bit into the drier theory of sleep, so what sleep actually is and why it happens in the body and what happens. Then we're going to look at some of the studies from this book and finish up the talk or finish up the session with simple tips and tools that you can use to improve sleep. Right, so let's start with, first of all, what induces sleep. So how does our body even know when it has to sleep? So why do we get tired in the first place? And there are basically two mechanisms. First one is the circadian rhythm that is not precisely 24 hours. So this was actually found out by two researchers that put themselves into a cave without any sunlight. And they simply looked at what their sleeping pattern, their sleeping rhythm would be if there's no influence of sunlight. And they actually found that their natural day cycles are actually longer than 24 hours. So on average, they did this study later than on a lot of people, and on average, it's 15 minutes longer, but it can be up to an hour. So for one of the researchers, I think it was somewhere in the 50-minute range. And it's actually the sunlight that resets this cycle every day. So without sunlight exposure, your rhythm gets out of whack. This is also why it's quite important after you've traveled, when you have a jet lag. Sun exposure is one of the best things you can do to adapt to the new day-night cycle. This is, by the way, also, if you've ever wondered, why do we call it circadian rhythm? There's the word circa in there. That's exactly why, because it's not exactly a day, or it's not exactly 24 hours. Right, so the second mechanism is sleep pressure. So we talked yesterday about movement. So when you move around during your day, you use ATP, so adenosine triphosphate. That's what your muscles use to get the energy that they need to contract. And one of the waste products of this metabolism is actually adenosine. So it gets cleared during the night, and during the day you move around, you build up a lot of adenosine, and the more adenosine you have in your system, the more the sleep pressure builds up. And what adenosine then does in the brain is that it shuts down the wake promoting regions, and it turns up the sleep inducing regions in the brain. And caffeine battles for the same receptors as adenosine. That's actually what caffeine does. It basically masks the fact that adenosine or pushes all the adenosine away. So you don't feel that sleep pressure for a while, as long as caffeine blocks these receptors. And that's also why when caffeine stops working, so after a couple of hours, you get the caffeine out of the system, and then all the sleep pressure comes back at once. That's why you have these afternoon crashes when you use a lot of caffeine in the morning. And there's a third thing that helps in your body with sleeping, and it's melatonin. And melatonin itself doesn't really do anything, so it doesn't induce sleep by itself, but it simply signals to the brain it is dark. So once it's dark, that melatonin says to the brain, okay, it's dark, and then this indirectly introduces also the sleep-inducing regions. And this is one of the things you disrupt actually if you watch late night TV or you're on your phone until the minute you fall asleep. That's when the melatonin release is basically suppressed, because in principle it's dark outside, but your phone has lights, your TV has lights, also artificial light in your apartment will also block melatonin. You can do a little bit, blue light has a stronger effect on melatonin production than red light. That's why you have these blue light filters on modern phones and most other devices. But even if you use these blue light filters, you still block melatonin. It's one of these things that you can get as a supplement. So when there's, just yesterday, I saw one of these ads for NyQuil or something, and they put melatonin in there to help you sleep. But the problem with that is, since melatonin is a hormone, like with any other hormone, if you induce it externally, your body after a while actually stops producing it itself, or it at least reduces its production of itself, meaning you kind of get dependent on putting it in your body all the time, because your body stops the production. So it can be nice for one night of sleep if you have stress or whatever, but don't get used to using melatonin. All right, so next thing, what happens during sleep? So why do we sleep in the first place? So there are REM, so this rapid eye movement, you've probably heard about that, phases of sleep. That's also when we dream, and the NREM or non-REM sleep cycles, where we basically have deep sleep. And NREM is dominant in the beginning of the night to clear memory banks, and REM sleep dominates later to solidify new memories. So imagine like a computer that you shut down. The REM sleep, or the NREM sleep, first of all, makes some space on the hard drive, on the permanent storage, and the REM then later takes memory from your RAM into the hard drive. And for that to happen, you need both, because you first of all need to make space to solidify new memories. And if you normally, so if you, let's say you have a typical sleeping pattern from midnight to 8 a.m. and you wake up at 6 a.m., so just 2 hours earlier, which is, I guess, not too uncommon, 60 to 90% of REM sleep is lost. So you miss out on the opportunity to solidify the new memories that you made that day. So whenever when you talk with people about sleep and dreams and stuff like that, when people tell you they don't dream, there's a good chance they're simply losing out on the REM sleep, and that the memory, the memory is impaired because of that. So for us as scientists, I think this is one of the most interesting studies that has been done. I'm going to show you some others later, but let's start with this one. So the setup of the study was simply they took all the participants of the study and had them study something for 2 hours, and then they got 90 minutes of rest. The one group was napping, so they actually got a nap of 90 minutes, which is, by the way, an entire sleep cycle. So what you need from being awake through the REM phase to the NREM phase, back up to the REM phase, back to being awake, that approximately takes 90 minutes. So it's an entire sleep cycle. And the other half of the group was simply asked to be on their phones and browse the web. And afterwards, there was another 2 hours of studying. And what they found is that the nap that they took replenished learning ability by 20%. So this information that we just talked about, the information is moved from the short-term storage, so from the hippocampus to the long-term storage to the cortex. And this did not happen for people that simply took a rest without sleeping. And one thing that I found very interesting while reading a book was a certain setup. 100 words were marked either with F, forget, or R, remember. And the nap group had filtered for the R words, while the awake group had not. So sleep filters memory for importance. That's if you remember your bachelor studies or your master's studies, whenever the professor said, okay, this is not relevant for the exam, out, I don't need that. Yeah. Because our brains have to be efficient, because we cannot remember everything we ever learned, we cannot remember everything that ever happened to us. So the brain has to prioritize important memories from unimportant memories, and that's exactly what happens during sleep. Right, we talk a lot about muscle memory in sports, so that your muscles basically remember how to do certain movements. However, muscles don't have brains, muscles don't have memory. So when we talk about muscle memory, it's really brain memory. And this is very important either for if you're an athlete, you're trying to learn sport, or also maybe you're a musician, you want to learn an instrument. And for that, they did this study where participants simply had to do a certain combination of numbers on a keyboard. So imagine your keyboard, you're supposed to press 4, 5, 8, 6, 1 as accurately and as fast as possible. Okay, and they got 12 minutes of practice time to do the same combination over and over and over. And 12 hours later, they retested that, and they wanted to check who is faster. The one group that did it from morning, they practiced in the morning, and then they retested at night before they went to sleep without a nap in between, and there was no real improvement. So they were as good at night as they were in the morning when they practiced. However, in the other group, from night to morning, where there was 8 hours of sleep in between, the participants got, on average, 20% faster and 35% more accurate. So from personal experience, I once tried to learn a new song on a piano, and during one day, I could not get it. You know, I was trying and trying and trying again, and it simply did not improve. And next morning I woke up, tried again, and it worked. And this is what this study shows, from anecdotal evidence to proper scientific evidence. Right, since this is a workshop on mental health, of course, people also looked at emotionality, and they found that negative emotional reactions, like, for example, anxiety, is up 60% after just one night without sleep. And the cause of that is that the prefrontal cortex, so the newest region of the brain, so to say, which is which is where our human rationality or logical thinking is coming from, which is the counterpart to the old part of the brain, or the more animalistic part of the brain, is impaired. And the correlation between mental illness and sleep loss was also studied. And I think these kind of studies, you cannot do them anymore, but they did them in the 60s, I believe. So they deprived bipolar patients of 1 night of sleep, which for most of them automatically triggered a manic depressive episode, which is why you can't do studies like that anymore. But it's good to know. And improving sleep quality, and this is what they do nowadays, generally helps patients with any kind of mental illness. I'm going to see later also why. And one last thing about this, if you think, okay, 1 night without sleep, up 60%, usually we don't lose an entire night of sleep, it's just a couple of hours. However, in this study, they found, which had probably the most simplest setup of all of them, where they simply had to push a button when a red light appears. So red light would appear, you push a button, and do that for 10 minutes. Okay. And what they found as a result is that after 10 days of just 6 hours of sleep, which is, not that little, that's what a lot of people actually get, led to a 400% increase in misses. And that was the same as another group they tested with 1 entire night of lack of sleep. And what was even worse is that people, and this is where things get interesting, whenever people then tell me or believe that they don't need that much sleep, for them 6 hours is enough. The people are very bad at estimating their own sleep deprivation, and also bad at estimating their own performance. So people simply get used to the new baseline of bad performance, both physically and cognitively. So they think they're still as good as they were before. They still think they're as good as with 8 to 9 hours of sleep, but they're simply not. But if you objectively measure it, like they did in these studies, you can show that they're not, but they felt like they were. So after those 10 days of just 6 hours of sleep, they gave them 3 nights of recovery sleep. So basically where they could sleep as much as they wanted. And they still did not return to baseline. So if you ever wondered after an exam period, or after you hand in a paper or your thesis or whatever, why after a couple of nights or a couple of days of recovery, you still don't feel like you're at 100% again, it's because of that. The body takes longer to recover, and so does your brain. So generally, the performance in any task, physically or mentally, decreases after 15 hours of being awake, and after 19 hours, what they found is that you're more or less as cognitively impaired as if you have a blood alcohol level of 0.8 per ml, which is the legal driving limit in Germany, I believe. In Alzheimer's, I think this is an interesting study to understand what's actually happening in the brain. So Alzheimer's is characterized by the buildup of amyloid protein plaques in the brain. And what these plaques, or what this protein does, is actually not attacking your memory areas in the brain, but it's preventing NREM sleep, so the deep sleep, which is there to clear up your memory banks to allow new memory to be stored. And just by preventing NREM sleep, the memory loss happens. So again, the memory areas of your brain are unaffected by this protein. It's just that they prevent the NREM sleep, which then leads to memory loss. And the problem about that is that during NREM sleep, the lymphatic system, which is basically like the lymphatic system in the rest of our body, which cleans up waste products. In the brain, we have the lymphatic system. And it cleans up, among other things, this amyloid protein. So you see the problem here. The protein prevents NREM sleep, and during NREM sleep, this protein would usually be cleaned up. So you have a larger and larger buildup of this amyloid protein in the brain, which is a vicious cycle, and which is what makes Alzheimer's so, well, not deadly, but so such a big problem. Now, to a nicer topic of siestas. Around 2000, around the year 2000 in Greece, they switched politically to not have siestas anymore. And in the year after that, there was a 37% increase in death of heart diseases and even higher 60% in working men. So the people that were most affected by this switch. And current siesta cultures are 4 times as likely than American males to reach age 90. So if you ever lose out on a night of sleep and you want to catch up on that in the afternoon or right after lunch, that might be a good idea. Which is also why, for example, Google and other companies with relatively modern approaches to working culture actually allow their employees to have naps, to sleep, and even have rooms for that. Now, in terms of alcohol, so yes, we've all heard at some point, well, alcohol helps me to fall asleep. Problem with that is alcohol limits REM sleep, so the memory retention is impaired. And actually, if you're pregnant, fetuses spend most of their time sleeping to develop, which is a huge problem if the mother is alcoholic, because there's a higher likelihood of autism if the sleep of the fetus is impaired. And what they found is that even 1 to 2 glasses of wine suppress REM sleep in unborns. So even just a little bit is maybe too much. Right. One study that I also found interesting was, can you boost the effect of sleep by boosting the brain waves that happen during NREM sleep? So what they found was that by boosting the NREM waves, they could artificially double memory retention. So what they then try to find out is, well, if we don't do it electrically, but simply by sound waves, they could still get an improvement by 40%. So basically playing sound waves in the same frequency and as your brain waves, as the NREM waves, could improve memory by 40%. But before you get curious and build something by yourself, they also did the opposite study. So if you mess up the phase, it's basically 2 sine waves that you put on top of each other, and then the amplitude is amplified. If you mess up the phase, they also tried that. So you have the same frequency of the wave, but the phase is in a way that the wave body of the NREM wave is out of sync with the sound wave, then the memory was impaired. So the memory retention was actually worse than it was before. So careful. Right, about daylight savings time, because it's going to come up soon in spring, where we basically lose 1 hour of sleep. There were I'm not sure if this was, I think this study was done in America. There are on the day after 24% more heart attacks than on an average day. And in fall, where you gain an hour, they measured 21% less heart attacks. And also car crashes and suicides were affected by that. So simply by taking an hour away from people or giving them an hour, you can affect their health quite a bit. Other health impairments. So immune system is very strongly impaired by lack of sleep. So after 9 to 4 hours of sleep, there's a 70% reduction of killer cells. Short sleep is linked to all-cause mortality. 711 genes are modified, immune system is downregulated, inflammation is up, tumor building is up, stress is up, and also, given our times currently, getting 4 to 6 hours of sleep makes vaccines less effective. So also something to keep in mind when getting the vaccine. So one of the last things I want to talk about in terms of sleep is the connection to nutrition. So if you have a lack of sleep, that promotes sympathetic drive, so your cortisol levels will be higher, so you're more stressed. but this might actually feel like you have more energy, at least in the morning. But it also leads to more food cravings. So whenever your cortisol levels are high, it's usually when you crave sugary food. And they studied that in people that wanted to lose weight. So they had two groups, and they gave one group on average 5.5 hours of sleep. And whenever they lost weight, so let's say they lost 1 kilo of weight, only 30% of that was fat. And in the other group, group two, they gave them 8.5 hours of sleep, and half of the weight that they lost was fat. So also, again, in combination with what we talked about yesterday in terms of movement and improving your fitness, sleep plays a large role in that. So to conclude, why do we sleep? It's relatively simple. There's not a single function of the body that is not positively impacted by sleep. On the contrary, there's not a single function of the body that is not negatively impacted by the lack thereof. So, question to you now to make this a little bit more interactive, because otherwise I'm just talking all the time, and yeah, you just listen. I want to give you this question: how can you improve sleep today, next week, and what is out of your control? Okay, so what are the things that you can control about your sleep, and what are the things that you can't control? Simply, for now, put it in the chat to not make things too complicated with external tools. Put some ideas in the chat, and then we'll have a look afterwards. So take a minute, think about it. If you have an idea, put it in the chat, and then we'll see. I'll stop sharing my screen for a second, and then we come back. Right, I'm going to start reading some of the things that we have in the chat, some of the ideas. So yeah, first thing we have is keep regular sleeping hours, which is generally a good idea because we are creatures of habit. So the better your body can rely on a certain schedule, so a certain time where you go to sleep, a certain time when you wake up, a certain time that you get food, the more comfortable it feels usually, and the lower your stress levels will be. Because now in modern days, we have all the reasons in the world to stay up late, but you always have to think about the human body, not in terms of how we are now, but what kind of lives we had 10,000 years ago, because that's what evolution selected us for, not for modern life, computers and smartphones and stuff. And back then, the only reason to go to sleep later was war, and this would automatically mean higher levels of stress. So not to drink coffee and alcohol in the afternoon or evening. We talked about alcohol on the study. In terms of coffee, it's the half-life of caffeine in the bloodstream is actually 8 hours, meaning that even if you have a coffee right in the morning or take caffeine pill or green tea or whatever, by the time you go to sleep, if you go to sleep 16 hours later, there's still a quarter of that caffeine in your blood, meaning that the sleep pressure cycle will still be disturbed. And so the later you get your coffee fix, the more impaired it will be. Meditation, breathing exercises, great idea, especially before going to sleep. It's a great way to get simply the thoughts out of your head also from the day. Because usually when you meditate, you try to breathe. That's when you think about all the things that happened during the day. And it's better to have that actually while you're awake, where you can maybe also write things down and think about what you have to do the next day, or something that bothered you during the day, or something you're grateful for. It's also a great exercise to do. Simply to have these thoughts out of your system before you go to sleep, because otherwise everything comes crashing down on you when you sleep. And especially if you had a stressful day, that will also impair sleep. So it's better to get it out before. Setting a timer for going to sleep, good idea. No phone and TV in the last hour, very good idea, because again, melatonin. And even if you ignore melatonin, the effect of melatonin, this is what they found out recently with all the blue light filters that have been developed for the devices, that people still have problems falling asleep. And sometimes not even just the light that comes from a phone or from TV, but it's all this stimulation. You know, you get a message, you think about it, or you watch something on TV. It might not be the most calming thing to watch. I don't know, are into action movies or horror shows or whatever. And it all puts more information on your brain when the last hour should be to unwind. Get exposed to light in the morning, don't get exposed to light in the evening. Again, as long as it's natural light, it's also fine in the evening, but yeah, the sun is there to adjust your circadian rhythm each and every day. And yeah, so more artificial light in the evening means later sleep time, and the sun still goes up at a certain time in the morning. So ideally you want to wake up with the, more or less, wake up with the sunrise and go to sleep at sunset or an hour later. And the more light you get in the evening, the later you're going to fall asleep, so the less time you have until sunrise. Counting sheep. Now, we did that yesterday as a breathing exercise, not counting sheep, but counting your breaths, which again is meditation, can really help to, first of all, lower cortisol, but also simply lower heart rate and all the other benefits that come from meditation and breathing exercises. Out of control is the rhythm kids have and are forced to have. School start, very true. It's also in the book that actually the reason, you know, it's like the sleeping cycle that you have throughout the day. There was a Nobel Prize won just a few years ago on the discovery of sleeping types. So that this idea of like, I'm an evening person, I'm a morning person, we all had this idea that this exists, but they could actually prove it scientifically. And there's a good reason for that, that if you think about humans as living together in a tribe, if everyone had the same sleeping schedule, so we all went to bed at the same time and we all woke up at the same time, that would make us vulnerable for an entire 8 hours. But if some people stay up a little longer, 2 hours, and other people wake up 2 hours earlier, which is usually the spread that we have in terms of sleeping times, that makes us vulnerable for only 4 hours where everyone is asleep. And that's the advantage, or the evolutionary advantage, of having different sleeping times. And getting back to the kids, one reason, or that is hypothesized, that teenagers actually tend to have their sleeping cycles shifted to stay awake longer, simply because in the development of humans as teenagers, it's the time where we separate ourselves a little bit from our parents, and we have to basically make our own experiences and all that in order to become fully capable individuals. And one way to do that is simply to shift the sleeping cycle for teenagers to simply stay awake 1 or 2 hours longer than their parents do, to make their own experiences, to have awake time away from their parents. And our school system isn't really adapted to that. So which leads to problems for a lot of teenagers in school, simply because they did not get enough sleep in order to fully pay attention in school. And especially when you have younger kids, and my brother has 2, my sister has 2, so I know the drill. Sleep can be heavily impaired by your kid. So that is something that probably is out of control. Exercise during the day, that is a good idea. Also because simply you have more, like the more you train, the more adenosine buildup you will have. So the more tired you're going to be during the night. And exercise is also a good way to reduce stress again after a long day at work or problematic day at work. Training can help to at least get rid of some of it. Put the smartphone furthest away from your bed when you go to bed. Good idea, because again, screens and stimulation. Not using electronic devices before going to sleep. Exactly the same. Physical exercises, but not in the evening. Good point. So when I say some exercise after work, you don't want to do that too late, because also exercise, at least in the beginning, increases a little bit your cortisol levels, so your muscles get the energy that they need. It's basically, again, sympathetic nervous system drive. And so in the evening, if you do it too late, you will simply still be awake. Like, you won't feel like sleeping if you do a very hard and intense workout very late. So it depends a little bit on the intensity. Like, a walk won't do much, and a run that is easy for you to do of like half an hour also won't keep you awake much longer. But some super high intensity exercise will. But again, depends. I usually say 3 hours before going to sleep, before you plan on going to sleep, the training session should be done. And 3 hours is the limit. It's not like the upper limit. Ideally, you want to have more time. Warm shower in the evening. Talking about temperatures, it's also a very good idea. We didn't get into that because it's a little more complicated, but it is generally a good idea to take showers or baths before going to sleep. Meditation, talked about it. Yoga, also a good idea. Don't work before sleeping, also, yeah, because again, this will make your brain active, which you then carry into your sleep. So your dreams, if you've ever noticed, your dreams are very heavily influenced by the last things you do in a day. So you watch some horror show right before going to sleep, you're probably going to dream about it. If you work until going to sleep, you're probably going to dream about that. So it's difficult to control your dreams. Like, there's probably nothing you can do to really control them, but this is the closest thing you're going to get. It's what you do in the last hour, or what you think about in the last hour before sleeping. Don't turn on the light in the evening, or at least dim them. Good idea. The breathing technique from yesterday has already helped me very well to fall asleep again tonight. Good to hear. I'm really glad. And if we do have time after the Q&A, maybe we can do a quick session of that again, but we'll see. Keep the same bedtime every day. We talked about it, the rhythm. I'm confused about the benefit of napping if REM sleep. Well, let's get to the questions later. Right, ongoing thoughts that trouble you, or leftover items from today's to-do list on a piece of paper before going to sleep. Very good point. It's called a brain dump. So this is also what usually comes out if you meditate in the evening. You will have troubling thoughts. You won't be able to meditate, or you won't be able to fully focus on your breaths, because there's still all these thoughts from the day. And simply writing them down gives your mind the ease that at least you thought about it, or at least you take care of it in some way. So if you ever woke up during the night and think like, oh man, I have to do this tomorrow, or I cannot forget about that tomorrow, it's better to write it down, because then your brain doesn't feel the need to remind you all the time. Okay? And also for troubling thoughts, sometimes all you have to do is write them down and get them out of your system. Fresh air in the bedroom at the right temperature might also help. Very true. They found the optimum bedroom temperature to be somewhere around 18 degrees, so relatively cold. Again, gets into temperature. We're not going to get into that, but yeah, very true. And last thing, messages. Right temperature for sleep is cooler than you might think, around 80 degrees now. Exactly. And noises, yeah, very true. So noise reduction around might be something out of your control if you have loud neighbors or kids. Might not always be something you can control, but the better you control the noise pollution around your bedroom, the better. And also the darker you can get your bedroom to be. So also light pollution is problematic, again, from outside. If you have, for example, a lantern outside of your apartment. All right. So I compiled. So usually this is an exercise that we do with murals, and it's highly interactive during the workshop. So can the room temperature also be too low? Yes, absolutely. Like, you don't want to be freezing to death while you sleep. So 18 degrees is optimal, meaning it's, well, the optimum shouldn't be much higher, shouldn't be much lower. Right, just to get back one more time to the screen share, let me show the list we compiled for one of the workshops of everything we came up with, and also the things that were recommended in the book. So first of all, if you want to improve your sleep, have the aim to improve your sleep. So if you're of the opinion, it has become popular, you can sleep when you're dead, then you're probably not going to improve your sleep much because you don't want to, and we cannot change anything that we don't want to change. So we had stick to the schedule, sport during the day, promote sleep at night, especially if you're consistent about it over long periods of time. But ideally, as I said, 3 hours before sleep, no more strenuous activity. Avoid eating 2 to 3 hours before bed. So also eating has an effect on sleep because during the night, our body has different things to do than digesting. So ideally, the digestion part should be finished before you go to sleep. So ideally 2 to 3 hours, again, depends on the meal size. Before bed, you don't want to eat too much. Alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine, we talked about it. 2/3 of liquids in the first half of the day. This is a good tip if you wake up repeatedly because simply you need to pee. And a good way to do that, to handle that, is to simply drink more during the first half of the day, so that in the second half you don't drink as much, so it's not all in your bladder when you try to sleep. Napping, we talked about it. It can be useful, but after 3 p.m. or very long naps can also impair your ability to sleep at night. So naps are always good as long as they don't impair night sleep. Doing something relaxing before going to bed, a hot bath can help regulate body temperature. Talked about it. Check your mattress and pillow. This is something you might not be able to change today, but within the next week or within the next month, if your mattress or your pillow is uncomfortable, get that fixed. It's money well spent. Sunlight exposure. Do not lie in bed awake for longer than 20 minutes. This is also a very important one. So if you do wake up, or if you do have problems falling asleep at night, don't be lying in bed for like 45 minutes trying to fall asleep, because your bed should be like Pavlov's bell, like the trigger for you for sleep. So more important even is not to use your phone or your laptop or anything else in bed, because that makes your bed multi-purpose. It's really, you go to bed and your brain knows that this is my place to sleep. So if you cannot sleep, simply get up, get to a different room, or get on the couch or something, read something, use anything that makes you tired, and then return back to sleep, return back to your bed. Showing yourself your own data can help. So either journaling or some sleep trackers, because generally we're motivated by data. So what gets measured gets improved. Meditation, I talked about it. Brain, I talked about it. Yeah, what in terms of the link between nutrition and sleep, all we have so far in terms of concrete scientific evidence is that a high sugar diet negatively impacts the sleep quality. If anything we talk about does not help, and you have strong problems like with sleep, then there's a certain type of therapy, CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, that is actually the only proven method to improve sleep on a therapy level, or even in terms of anything we could do scientifically or health-wise, or from the healthcare system, because these sleep medications do not induce naturalistic sleep. So all these sleeping pills, they sedate you, but that means you do not get the benefits from sleep, because sedation is something different than sleep. The two things that can help are melatonin. We talked about it. It's not good for long-term use since it's a hormone. And what has helped me personally, and there's not too many side effects, is CBD oil can help with inducing sleep. But again, you don't want to overuse any of these crutches, because you should be able to get to sleep by yourself. All right, this pretty much concludes the talk. I mean, this is something that can help you set the help you wake up in the morning as a wake-up light. You don't want to like it's from Philips, but there are also other brands that produce these things. It simply wakes you up. Instead of waking you up with an alarm, it wakes you up with light. So it basically simulates a sunrise. And this can, yeah, make the waking up experience a little bit smoother and nicer. So that concludes my talk. So if you want to stay in touch, here's all my contact data. If you want to get the full course on how to stay healthy physically and mentally throughout a PhD or throughout a scientific career, please give me a call or send me an email, and we can set something up.